Welcome to the Cyber Call, the podcast by Ride of Boom for managed service providers looking to stay ahead in an ever-changing world of cybersecurity. Each week, we dive into the latest threats, trends, and real-world strategies to help MSPs protect their clients and grow their businesses. Let's build a safer, stronger community together.
All right, welcome. Happy Monday to you all out there. And we've got a great one today here at the Cyber Call. As we wait for folks to join us and come on in, wanted to share out my screen. We'll do a little bit of banter before we introduce our special guest. And that does not preclude you to weigh in here, Will, as well. Talk about a few things. So the first thing I just wanted to talk about that caught my eye was this. And can you guys see my screen around Claude bringing cybersecurity capabilities, that URL?
Yep.
All right, perfect. So as we all know, that we had Project Glasswing and all of the fun stuff around Mythos a few months back. Where we're heading and what it appears right now is Anthropic is making an effort to open this up further, to protect, if you will, the open source community, and then further provide funding in ways of, credits, as you can see here, for patching, as well as further integrating into our cyber defense tools. Now, I think I have to stop sharing and reshare, but I'll put all these URLs in, but there's another URL here that it links off to very right in the email, or sorry, in the blog, and it talks about the integrated platforms, and it talks about Wiz, Palo Alto, CrowdStrike, and others. And so what I wanted to just kind of talk about is first and foremost, number one, let me stop sharing here. Maybe starting with you, Will, it's wonderful if you're in the biggest of big, but for 30 years, I've played in, the SMB area where, it's, trying to help companies that, range from, let's call it 25. Now, arguably 25 employees to 500, it might go a little bit bigger. But when do you think we're going to start seeing some love down here? Do you think these companies that are trying to go public and have, immense aspirations for these valuations, is it going to kind of be how some of the bigger players and even CISA views, the biggest of big versus really, the SMB? And ironically, the last comment is, when we talk about this a lot, MSPs support 65% of the GDP, right? And north of 60% of critical infrastructure. So I find it always interesting of where the focus is. But what's your take on this?
I mean, you've got two very different markets. I think I actually just saw an article about Huntress, right? Talking about how his idea to service the SMB space was ridiculous and it would never work. And obviously he made it work. And so I think as somebody who's advised a lot of startups too, I kind of you have to pick your lane. There's definitely places. I mean, I've seen small companies using CrowdStrike, right? Where you would expect they're just going to use Windows Defender, right? So I think it does kind of depend on, the industry they're in as well. And the budget. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. It's how much, what can they act the reason most small businesses don't have all of the security, quote unquote, that they need is because they can only afford to do so much. So you have to prioritize that risk, right? So I don't know that if I'm running a small business, it's $5-10 million a year, I need to integrate Mythos into my Sonic walls or anything, right?
Yeah, it's fair. How about you, Phyllis? This is something you and I have talked about quite a bit. Vulnerabilities obviously overtook everything this year. when we look at the Verizon data breach report for initial access. So although Will has an excellent point on budget and everything, it's still, the number one, at least from a Verizon DVR perspective, initial access vector. So how do you look at this?
So I do think we are making some progress. So if you look at CMMC, it really came about with supply chain, and that there are these smaller suppliers in the supply chain that are subject to being compromised, which is causing upstream issues, right? So there is definitely this acknowledgement from the government and from these larger organizations, we have to be cognizant of our supply chain. We have to, so of course, government, the reaction is regulation, top down, we're going to do this regulation, but then it's like, oh no, can we really afford to be subject to a CMMC? And so, Andrew, I think you bring out a good point that there is still this gap, this recognition of how do we help these small mediums who, at CIS, we've talked about this. We believe that the MSPs are so critical. They are the last mile. They're the ones supplying, not just IT, but cybersecurity services to that last mile. And so how is it that we help, the small mediums, or the organizations that are helping the small mediums, the MSPs, who are small mediums in and of themselves, to really get up to that par? So, Anthropic in their own way are, trying. And I would say some of these companies now are also like, oh, we're going to have a package for smaller organizations and things like that. But I think it's something that needs to be done. I think it's also like that training of, even at my company, you got to use AI. And if you don't use AI, you're going to fall behind. You better use AI, right? And, I was just talking about this the other day is Claude is great. It's like, oh my gosh, look at this tool. Look at this. I created my own GRC, Phyllis. It's this. And then it's like, oh, but are your answers right? I'm very concerned about QA testing and things like that. So I think it's more than we're going to make it available. You can use it. You can do this. But then I'm going on a rant right now about the fidelity of the results or whatever. So I think it's important to make it available to everybody. I do think there's a little bit of a lack of training.
There's a lot.
And a lack of, I think people do realize, but like, how is it that you can do the QA testing?
Yeah. Well, look, you brought up some really good points. Let's go to the man with the money. Jason, Phyllis brought up, CMMC just as an example, right? And it wasn't until I think it's Project Seawolf where the hypersonic missile information, Phyllis, got into the hands. And that's when, all the politicians freaked out because China got a hold of, those weapon systems and oh my God, you've got to secure the supply chain. There's various ways we can go about this. As Jacob Horn said, I mean, hey, hell, you can subsidize it if you're so concerned about it, and, help out these small businesses. But, this is something, you've worked with the biggest of big, and now, as the last 3.5 years as an MSP, Jason, how do you reconcile the need for, these critical things that do and can exhibit, risk in a company when you're the one holding the capital purse strings as the CFO?
Yeah, I mean, obviously as a CFO, I look at enterprise risk and it's all important, but I mean, I think you're never going to mitigate all risk, right? You got to understand what risk you're going to hold and you're going to have. But I like to understand, I mean, obviously if I can get the technical risk, because I don't understand all the stuff you just talked about. Everybody back, I understand some of it, but I mean, we cover my lens. I'm not a technical guy. So you got to translate it to me to business outcomes or how it affects me on the strategic side. And if you can do that and translate it from a technical risk to a business outcome or operational item, and then you can give me a probability and or financial impact potentially, we can have some good discussions, because then I could take that information and then force rank it with all the other capital investment decisions we have to make as a company. And, put it out there and say, okay, this is out there. Do we need to do it? Is this something we need to do now? Are we going into an industry where we need the compliance frameworks? or are we already in it? Should we do it? And, where are we in that? How does this help us? So there's a lot of factors that go into the decisions. Obviously, I'm a data guy, so I love to have all the information. But I kind of like to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. But hope is not a strategy. I know that. But but I do understand it. So the more I can have that information, and like I said, before I started at InfoSystems, I didn't understand the cybersecurity world and all the tech risk and stuff that was out there as much as I do now. Now I'm like, holy cow, CFOs that may not be as close to it now as I am need to understand this, because it truly impacts their risk portfolio. It may impact enablement to go into a new market. It may be in stopping revenue that they're in a current market. I mean, there's so many things that go into it, but we've just got to start talking that same language. And you were sharing with me how you do that and try to do that a lot, which I think is very, very key, because people in my seat just don't understand all the technical stuff. We understand it's out there, but I don't have a limited money tree that I can just go get money from and just get everything and get us as compliant as we want. So it's kind of what's the low-hanging fruit? What can help us get more secure quicker with the lowest, dollar impact, and what does that mitigate and protect if we do that? And then just kind of stair step it towards getting to where we ultimately want to be.
Yeah. I've seen organizations with CMMC specifically, organizations, because they're compliant, they're winning bigger, they're winning the deals that they have to have, or that requires that. They're getting more revenue, they're growing, and they're at a state where their suppliers are like, well, I really don't want to do that. And they're in a position to go, well, that's fine, I'll just buy you, because now I have enough capital to do that. So that is a story I would tell a CFO or a CEO who's looking for growth and wants to expand. I'm like, there's one example of why, security can be a growth enabler.
Well, not only with that, but I think, and I've talked about this with you, Andrew, about contract risk and stuff. So, I would say the golden rule, what the golden rule is? Those who have the gold make the rules. And we're going after some service activity with a Fortune 10 company. And we were looking through the contracts, and we had some stuff there that, they were like, okay, this is causing me some pause. We brought our insurance company in to make sure that we were covered if anything were to happen with this language. We weren't 100% aligned and we couldn't change it. And they said, hey, we're not going to change this language. Do you want to do business with us or not? If not, we'll move on. And so we had to learn to accept that risk, right? But I think there's frameworks of CMMC, but there's also operational maturity of your clients. So if they're more mature, they're going to have more of that posture that it says, hey, you're going to take it or leave it. So you need to understand that risk. Can you mitigate it? Are you going to hold it? And if you are going to hold it, your board and your C-suite need to understand that and maybe do some stop gaps behind it, whether it's insurance or other things to help mitigate that exposure. But man, it's not just frameworks, it's also contract risk. I think that you got to look at too, to make sure that you're all understanding what you're getting into. Because I think so many people are so excited about getting that potential sale or getting that potential thing that they say, oh, this is great, I'm going to sign it. And they don't know what they hand. And, good intentions are great until the crap hits the fan and everybody goes back to the legal documents. And then that's whatever you signed up is what you're getting. So,
yeah, I've had more than one conversation where it's like, hey, we just booked this big new client to our insert agency here, and there's 4 pages of 6-point font cybersecurity requirements. I now need SIM and EDR and a response plan and a tabletop exercise and insurance, and it drives business too.
Yeah, and for that, so you may have the capital, but are you mature enough to get the cybersecurity insurance that you need to cover, right? Yeah. It's like, I may have money, but I'm not mature enough. I don't have this systems, processes, frameworks to do it. So there's a lot of things that go into getting that insurance now. And I'm telling you, when on Wall Street put out an article years ago, if you're wanting to get capital or to sell in the future, it's one of the top 3 things that venture capitalists look at in PE is the cybersecurity posture of your organizational maturity. So, I mean, this is not going away. So it's not just, a cybersecurity issue anymore. If you're wanting to get some major capital, if you're wanting to sell or grow into certain things, you're going to have these discussions and get mature in this area.
So, Jonathan, that's really good points. Jonathan, let me let you cap this and we'll get on into today's conversation. As an organization with now, before we get up into the SentinelOnes, CrowdStrikes, et cetera, but as an organization, Ninja now with arguably one of the largest market caps, do you guys feel, or are you, close to being able to access these platforms like, the Mythos type security things? Do you feel it's going to make its way down to companies your size even? What are your thoughts there?
I think that with any of these things, I think it's always looking to see what's out there, always testing to see what's available. But I still keep coming back to fundamentals and how those are enforced, whether it's things like, we've talked about regulation in the MSP world forever. And then the conversation shifted to, well, informal regulation is the financial motivators, things like you're talking about, Jason. What are acquirers going to require? What is cyber insurance going to require? That sort of thing. And I think that, looking at some of these bigger companies and what they're doing, we're focused on the AI providers, but it also extends into, who owns basically the biggest, attack services. It's companies like Microsoft. And we've seen the discussion around, what they gate behind certain levels of security. If we're talking about making the biggest difference for folks, we've seen in the past where they make some things more available to lower levels, and that's made a huge impact on everyone's security posture, right? And so I think companies doing that sort of thing, looking at it's not Project Glasswing, but it's OpenAI's initiative that focuses on the open source maintainers. And what they're doing, they're providing, you're mentioning getting access to some of these advanced tools. They are targeting some places where it's the classic meme where it's the half of the internet is being maintained by this tiny little piece down here that has like one part-time maintainer or whatever. So identifying things like that in supply chain where there's some organizations that don't necessarily have the resources, and how can we provide them with better tools? And probably, because we all know tools aren't the answer alone, it needs to come with people and process too. And that's where MSPs come in. That's where folks like Will come in with providing some additional, not just the tools, but the strategy and the capabilities too, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It's interesting. You said it made me think of something. The Microsoft world, right? Like they have an SMB market, and having worked for them, I remember hearing like Satya say, we have to get the SMB market because it's huge. It's massive. It is the most, it is where all the money really is, where most of the money comes from. So those organizations that want to make money are going to find ways to create opportunities for their business there. I think you've got something like Anthropic today, still kind of young, right? And maybe not worried about that, right, aspect of it now, as far as like, but yeah, at some point they probably will have that mindset of like, okay, because what does every product company do? They find a niche and then they grow and they take that niche over, and then they're like, well, we need to make more money, so let's start building stuff that we don't know anything about or that other people already know.
Really good point as we segue into this, Will. I mean, Microsoft has made massive strides in the past 2 years to focus on MSPs. I mean, they've been like awesome to us at Right at Boom. They're going to be back this year in force. And so it's funny you say that. Well, funny's wrong, but you know what I'm saying? Yeah. It's astute that you say that, because that's exactly, they recognize the importance of our, so it's great to see.
All right, I think sorry, Andrew, I'm just going to make one last quick point that a lot of these tools, it makes me think back to, when EDR started first coming around and just providing that to a small organization. If our focus is truly the SMB, I think it goes back to the original point. Are there really people on staff who are going to be able to manage that effectively, know what to do with it, be able to react to alerts? So I think, again, it's like what Eric says in the comments, that a lot of roads come back to MSPs being available to provide the expertise and the hands-on help to really help small organizations in particular.
Yeah. Cool. All right. I'm going to put a few URLs in chat just as an anecdote, because this is what we're going to be talking to our special guest today, Will. This is, when I say hot off the press, this came last week, the first URL from Palo Alto's Unit 42, who does just some fantastic research. And, we're going to get into speaking about the changing ways in which threat actors are using social engineering. We've gone from, years and years now of focusing on our security awareness training directly to phishing, right? Right. And we've talked about this, right? Spot the bad, hover over the email address, spot the, fishy looking icons, or, but if you think about our security awareness training, it's largely been focused in the genre. And as threat actors always do, they look at, okay, so the defenses are getting better here. We're having less results. Well, what's next? Well, if you take a look at this article, you'll see that there has been just a massive increase this year alone. I think it's a 4 or 6-fold increase in Microsoft Teams and Slack. So basically, threat actors using these collaboration tools to begin the initial access. And because so many of us have companies, maybe you yourselves, right? We speak to external organizations through these collaboration tools. I asked a bunch of MSPs this past week about this and, about their clients. And they're like, yeah, look, we wish we could lock it down, but they tell us this is how they communicate with this company, and this company. Now, there's certainly conditional access policies that can be put in place, and we're going to talk about those things. But the second article, and as I kick this off to introduce Will, is really important that you read, because realize not only are they using these collaboration tools to get access to your customers, they're posing as trusted sources. And what I mean by that is, hey, it's the IT department. Hey, it's the MSP. And in fact, Unit 42 calls out managed service providers in the second article. So if you do not think this is coming to a theater near you, I would strongly push back and think about this in the context of how you are going to work on this. Last thing I'll say, Will, is look, it didn't take too long for token hijacking and all the tools around Evil Jinx and all these platforms, phishing as a service platforms, to get democratized, be delivered very inexpensively from the enterprise-based attacks down to just ubiquitous attacks at every level. And you can see, again, with AI, we've been talking about it. It's not going to take much, in my opinion, to figure out a kit, right? Air quoting, a kit for this. So with that, Will, awesome to have you. I'll put your URL back in again. You caught my eye on LinkedIn. I'm like scrolling one day and like, this guy's got 500 likes here, 750 likes here, 30 some odd thousand followers. And, what you're saying resonated so much. Here's this technical backgrounded human being that is translating risk in business terms and coming up with these, really cool images to speak to executives. So I reached out. You were kind enough to take my call. You're going to be at Right at Boom this year, doing some workshops, some training. So we're thrilled about that. So, Will, tell us a little about yourself, your background, and what you do there at Vlogics.
Yeah, sure. First off, thanks. I appreciate it. And anytime anybody tells me they like the content, that makes me happy, because that's why I do it. There's parts of it I should outsource, like the visuals, because it takes me forever. But it's the part I like the most, so I keep doing it. It just takes up more of my time. But I've been in cybersecurity for 26 years now. Started in the Marine Corps, had a couple of roles at some retailers before I got into consulting and managed security services. So most of my career has been spent in that world, in the managed services world, in the consulting world. And in that time, I have pretty much led and built pretty much every role that exists. I've spent, I've built pre-sales teams and ran those. I've done the channel. I've been a product manager. I've been a program manager. I've been the chief architect at one place, and now I'm the chief revenue officer here. So pretty much I understand how those companies work, and I've kind of worked in all those aspects. And somewhere early in my career, they realized that one, Will can speak to CISOs and CIOs and whoever else, and talk about our services. So I always had to be the guy who would go in and have those chats. Like, oh, we're talking PCI today, great. Or we're going to talk about managed security services, or we're going to talk about penetration testing, whatever. didn't matter. So I always say I know a whole little about a lot of things. So I can usually have a conversation about just about anything as long as we don't have to go too deep in any one spot. So yeah, that's so now at VLogic. So we are a managed security services provider. We do have so we have the full stack of capability, whether you want just the EDR or an XDR and SIM stuff, or you want the full suite. We do like, asset visibility and attack path mapping, all that. We've got a data center outside of Pittsburgh, and we're also doing the traditional MSP IT stuff as well. So I own basically everything from we don't know who you are to let's sign the deal. And then I have a president who takes over and makes sure all the delivery goes and works really well. So that's where I sit today.
Got it. And as I hand it to Jonathan to kick it off, well, you've held roles as security architect, CISO, so you get both sides. Really important in the conversation. So Jonathan, over to you, bud.
Oh, thanks, Andrew. And Will, thanks for your service and everything, and very cool to have you with all your background here. Kicking it off, looking at this specific, the articles that Andrew was sharing that Palo Alto's Unit 42 highlighted. I'm always super appreciative when I see this, when I see the Verizon DBIR, and any kind of blog post where people are threat intel, right? And especially regarding trends, because it can be put some numbers behind some of the things we're maybe feeling or kind of seeing here and there. So my first question is about that. They called out a fourfold jump in this new type of activity, the malicious Slack and Teams messages. And so I'm curious, with you following along on all the trends for many, do you think this is something that's genuinely new, or do you think that this is something where it just kind of popped onto the radar more recently?
Yeah, to me, it just makes sense that it would happen. It's just text messaging, right? We've been getting text message scams forever. It's just now they're using a different tool for it, right? If this were happening on WhatsApp, would we be having this conversation? No, because it wouldn't be a big deal because we already know that happens. So yeah, to me, I think it is, to what Andrew kind of mentioned at the beginning. We've all been so inundated with, this is how you detect a phishing email. Oh, this is a scam text. Every phone call we get is a scam from somebody trying to sell you a loan you're not going to get and get your financial information, right? So we're kind of numb to all of that. So the attackers have basically just said, okay, well, let me go to the next thing where they're not numb to it yet and try to exploit that, I think.
Can I ask a question though?
Sure.
But there is this, it does seem kind of natural,
Mm-hmm.
But there is this preconceived notion that when I'm on Slack, my company Slack, it's trusted. It's my company Slack, right? So we're not co-located anymore. We're all co-located on Slack, right? And so, there is like, oh, did someone, maybe they had to kind of break into your, I don't know, enclave, whatever you call it on Slack, or, your team on Teams or whatever. So there is kind of that added layer of trust. I think we all are now skeptical of text because anyone, your number's public, blah, blah, blah. But there is that assumption that perhaps your team on Teams is not public.
Which is exactly, yeah. And I 100% agree. I think that's exactly why it's happening now, because you let your guard down a little bit, because does feel like it's yours. Like, that's why it's working, because it is new. It is a new way to be attacked that we're not numb to yet, and because there is that inundated trust. I will say this though, and I think we'll probably get to this at some point. If it is a legitimate account within your company that they've taken over and are messaging you, you really can't fault the person for listening to the actual IT person's account that's messaging them. So there are some challenges there once you are breached.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think you bring up a good point, Jonathan. I'll just make this, is that, the protocols, right? I think this is almost like, when we finally had to put controls in with BEC, Will. Like, in other words, it's one thing let's say I work for Jason in accounts payable and I'm about to, send money. Well, there's another human factor in the loop where, hey, if it's this much money, it's got to go to another factor. And if it's maybe we get to the point where if it's resetting MFA, hey, we don't do that through Slack, right? We only do resetting the MFA through this. I think we're going to have to skate to a little bit to where the puck's going, but I know it's necessarily people might go, well, that's highly inefficient, but so is, a $500,000 email compromise.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It is a matter of there's probably not governance controls around what processes can be done where and how they have to be done to that degree where they've actually considered it. Also, I mean, while we've been doing this messaging thing since the Skype days, it's since COVID. It's kind of new it used to be new to everybody. Now it's second nature. But again, it's a new technology that's highly trusted. So again, it's easier to exploit. So
for sure,
we probably didn't think about that. And I'll be, as somebody who's worked for Microsoft, most Teams deployments I've ever seen are not done right. They're always and people don't use Teams properly. Like they think of it like, anyway, that's a whole tangent about like why you should bring in experts to deploy your technology. But
man, I was going to ask about that point too, though, as well. I mean, we come to expect a pretty standardized format in terms of emails and everything. We have the classic recommendations, hover over the link and all that other stuff. But yeah, Teams, I mean, no one Teams environment really necessarily looks the same. They always there's funky things going on there all the time. I may be very skeptical of a typo I see in an email, but I'm used to seeing typos in Slack and in Teams all the time. So there's a more kind of informal communication style that people can expect too. Is there anything else like that, Will, that you think are kind of priming this to make it even more, a little bit more dangerous, I guess, in a different way than emails?
Yeah, I think you just kind of hit on all the right points, right? Why it's being so successful and why. And when COVID hit, we saw a 600% increase in phishing emails, I think, because now the criminals knew all the people are now working at home. And when you're at home, you're comfortable, you're in your walls and everything is okay. You're more relaxed. And so it's not just about the technology. It's about understanding who you're going, from a criminal mindset, who you're going after and what they're going to be susceptible to. So I think to everything you just said, yeah, I'm worried less about my text and my capitalization and punctuations and Teams, whatever, just like I am when I text on my phone, which is why when, the criminals text you and then they give you like a signature file that says CEO with it, and it's completely bogus, right? Because that's not how people text.
Yeah. Is there anything that in terms of, I don't know, adjusting security awareness and everything? I mean, is it just a matter of showing people more examples? Is there anything else that you think is going to be effective or we should be focusing on?
I think, there's obviously technical controls. You have to put changes into your monitoring, in your response process. And then a lot of it is end user training to make people realize, well, this is an attack path. Because I think a lot of people probably don't understand that is an attack path now.
Well, have you guys gotten to the point where you're just like, hey, out of the gate, we're just going to, we know you do business with this, and, these external entities, but, Microsoft makes it pretty easy these days to simply shut off external communications. And the article talks about, the mitigating controls. Have you gotten into any of those combos with your clients, and what kind of pushback do you get? I'm just curious. I haven't had that specific conversation. Like, I know ours internally is locked down. If I have somebody that I need to communicate with, it's easy to add the domain, like you said. To me, that would be like step one of dealing with this. Is like, we have. How many clients do you actually have? How long is it going to take you to put a few hundred domains, into your Teams that are allowed to be used? Right.
Well, I saw that. Yeah, looking at that article too, because I'm just a huge fan of anytime you can help people not put them in a position to have to make the right decision all the time. So controls are great. And I was looking and seeing, of course, I can imagine blocking all external is going to be a harder push, Jason. If we come to you and say, hey, we're going to shut down, so all of a sudden you're going to have a lot of friction that way. That might not be the most appetizing, but there's some smaller things too where you can at least block free trial accounts. You can block accounts that are free or associated with not paid plans, things like that. So, I mean, any kind of thoughts there, Will, of like maybe stepping up to like kind of full restrictions?
Yeah, I think you have to look at, as with anything, what's the actual risk to your business, right? From the external account side of the house. If your company's not using that, then it's an obvious, like, you know, like if you were to come to my company and say, hey, we're going to block them, we already do, because I'm not allowing external communication. And if people are, I don't know how many organizations are using their Slack to communicate with their vendors, right? Or their teams and things like that. I know of the places I've worked in the last decade, that's not really a regular common occurrence, right? At least in the world that I'm seeing. So I think it is pretty easy to go, well, what's the actual risk if we shut this off? If you're gonna tell me, well, 300 of our supply chain vendors communicate to us through our team Slack, whatever it is, well, okay, then that's a problem. Now I need to go and probably do a little risk assessment, figure out, okay, what's the worst thing that can happen? What is what controls, how can I mitigate it? I think training is obviously, needs to happen regardless, but as far as you want to be able, like this specific breach that we talked about or that we saw, like by the time that the texts are happening and the team stuff is happening, it's already too late in some of these cases. So, also make sure you're finding the root cause and not putting a Band-Aid on the wrong thing, right?
Cool. Hey, well, got a question for you. When you I've not heard of this much before today or before recent, so I appreciate you bringing this up, but how do I size that in dollars from the risk potential, and then how do I mitigate it, and how much is that going to cost? So, and kind of how do I translate that from a technical standpoint to the board so they could understand? Is it as simple as just kind of an education, or is there capital dollars you see that we're going to have to get behind this?
So I think this is a subset of identity and access management, and it's a subset of your security operations, right? Your monitoring and response. So if I'm thinking about, like, from a CISO point of view, I've got a roadmap for 18, 24 months out, and I probably have, an IAM bracket that has a bunch of small identity and access because, things we're doing that we're improving. And I've got a couple of things that are probably underneath my SOC that we're doing. I'm going to find out where this fits. And I'm going to have to prioritize it too, because again, if I do that assessment and I see I'm going to financially need to figure that out as the security leader. Okay, what is the actual impact of this? Now we all know, mass shutdown, operations go away, whatever, but probability, all that stuff, factor all that together. And I think one of the things we talked about before the show was kind of like, how would you present that? I would look at, like, what is the worst case scenario that can happen, which is complete shutdown, ransomware type of thing. And what does that cost us? And as the security leader, I should already know how much money we make per minute, per day, per widget, whatever our metric is, and then frame it in that. And then you take, I heard somebody say they don't like to hear like the most likely or probable, or put a percentage on it then. Like that, but use an educated guess and be like, okay, if we're out of business for 3 days, we lose X amount of dollars. And there's a 50% chance that this could happen if we don't do this. Now I know how much money we could potentially lose. And now I can figure out what is a reasonable cost to get rid of that. Now I can start talking about what Jonathan said. And is it controls? Is it training? And you have to assume, well, training's free. Training's not free, right? Yeah, it takes time. You can be like, oh, well, the IT guy will go do it. Well, that's fine, but you're going to pull him away from doing something else that, so that you take all of that stuff into effect. And I think that's how I would bring that to the CEO and CFO. And it's probably going to sit again underneath that broader thing. And it's just going to be like an update. Okay, hey, our current SOC roadmap is like this. We have this budget. I need to add this item because we've seen this happening. It's a new risk. It's a priority because here's, look at all the other things that we're doing, but this is a higher probability. And then just explain it in that logic.
Well, can I ask maybe Jason and you this collectively, maybe starting with Jason. Jason, how do I maybe introduce to you, like, hey, does the HR group use this too? Number one, now all of a sudden passing potential, here's the benefits package.
Yeah.
You update
and personal information and all that and sensitive information. Yeah.
Right. Another trusted source, and then and then behind that, Jason, the ever popular, if you're a Microsoft suite, Copilot, and what does Copilot have or does not have access to? So I'm just curious from a CFO lens, like, what's that conversation need to look like for you to go, you're speaking gobbledygook, or wow, okay, you're making some sense to me here, why we should consider some policy and some thought around this. You're not just wasting my time here. It's
right.
Really it's meaningful.
Yeah, I think for me, CFOs, they should understand, like I call it enterprise risk, and that incorporates pretty much all the risk within the business. And that's why I think me and a CISO talk a lot the same, but we just talk different nomenclature that we got to get aligned on. But I think to your point, like I think when Will was talking earlier about the AP person getting the compromise for the collaboration tool and all that kind of stuff, well, there's other outside fraud controls I have that'll help that, whether it's positive pay or things like that to help mitigate it. But if you're looking at this as self, Andrew, I think it's tough as just education and getting the CFO and the people to understand, because I understand I didn't know what this meant. I thought finance had a lot of acronyms until I got into the IT space. But, DLP, I mean, we're all concerned about that. We're all worried about, personal information getting out there. And if you're in a framework that has to be under HIPAA, it's even more scrutinized. So, I mean, to your point, Andrew, it does affect all of them. And we are told that, hey, generally, if you're in teams, it's a protected environment. You can put stuff in there. You can collaborate. You can drop our sensitive stuff in there. But we're even going through now with Copilot, how are we structuring our data? Or how are we tagging our data? Because if not, you put Copilot in there and it's great. And if it's not tagged properly, I can ask a question and I can get sensitive information that's not tagged appropriately for my level in the organization. There's all this goes in together, and the CFO needs to understand that. And I didn't understand that as well as I do now before. So I think it's an education like what Will's doing through his LinkedIn and his conversation, just helping people understand the business risk and issues in dealing with the technical things that we're trying to we're all solving the same thing, but unfortunately there's a disconnect in language of what the technical people are doing to what the business is, and they just need to get aligned. And I think it kind of goes a lot better. Then you can force rank and understand what the risk is and all that kind of stuff.
Will, so can I give you words for the next part of this? Like, help maybe, how would you structure the purview conversation? Let's assume it could be enabled, multi-tenanted. There's tools now in our space that are like taking it and quote unquote making it multi-tenanted. Let's assume you're an MSP that can do that. Jason just mentioned, right? Being able to, classify the data and things like that. Now there's a data classification project. How might you come at him and go, all right, let's talk about some DLP. This is going to be so exciting, and it's going to cost you,
Before Infosys is on, like, what are you talking about? But now I understand. I'm like, hey, come on, let's talk. I get you. Let's go. Yeah. Sorry.
I cheat a little bit when it comes to data. Anytime DLP, and I go get legal also. Because the lawyers are your best friends when you're talking about data privacy, data protection, and just data in general. Data cleanup. I've seen organizations that have a ton of, why are you saving data that's like 10, 15 years old and has no actual value? Ask the lawyers if they want that, right? And then, obviously IT wants the space cleaned up. So I think that's part of it is having that conversation about what do we actually have to protect? Which goes back to one of my drums I constantly bang, asset management. And assets are not hardware. It's your data, it's your applications, it's your business processes, it's how everything works, right? That's an asset. And there's owners tied to that. So going back to like the HR example, you were asking, like, well, what's the process for sharing personal information? Like, what does the policy say on who's allowed to see it and how you're allowed to share it? And then within our environment, again, still evaluating the risk, if we're going to allow teams to, allow HR to transfer, personal stuff across it, do we have the controls in place to actually ensure that it's protected? And I think, again, because they're like, it's just a chat thing. I mean, they don't really like Teams is, significantly more than just chat. There is so much to Teams. You get into Viva and SharePoint and all this other stuff on the back end. Teams is just the like very tip of it. And so just putting stuff in there and having access to it creates a whole can of worms. And I think people don't understand that. So I think it goes back to risk and policy. Like, what are you allowed to do? And then if we're going to allow it in with our business process, whatever that process is, do we have the right controls in place? So that's how I would go about the DLP thing. Because technically it's a nightmare because there's so many, we all know it's it's a pain.
Would that resonate with you, Jace?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We've already started having some of those conversations, so that's not foreign to me with things and stuff. So yeah, I think that's definitely a good way to approach it.
Cool. All right.
Yeah, nothing scares people more than legal too. So if you get them on your side, you get the legal team and the CFO on your side, man, you got a strong alliance.
Yeah, that's those two best friends right there.
Yeah. So we'll kind of going along with that. So, if we get a breach that starts through a compromised Teams account instead of normal email, does that change how you advise clients when it comes to protecting forensic data and working with cybersecurity insurance?
Again, it's maybe a little like at the technical level. Maybe again, it's still an incident event, a breach, right? It's the matter of how it got in. I think depending on what your how granular your insurance policy is going to depend on, how the problems that could, potentially be around, dealing with that kind of side of it. Because, usually there's some type of risk assessment you have to do, or you're checking off box because they're worried about, do we have to pay you? Did you do the things you said you were going to do? Could this have been prevented? Did you say you were doing the things that were preventing it? I mean, that's really the issue there.
Also, Will, again, this comes back to budget. I'd love your thoughts as well, Jason, is logging, right? Oh, okay, now all of a sudden we're going to start talking about, we're going to log all your teams, telemetry and what's happening there. And granted, there are tools that do it very effectively, right, in our space, but there's that whole piece now, right? That, anyway, so
yeah. Well, I was going to say on that side of it, that's a little different than the, again, the controls for, this is an identity and access controls and a security monitoring issue, right? The fact that it's in Teams is just the tool in your environment, right?
Gotcha.
So, a lot of organizations are very, very poor with their access controls. Identity governance is a pain. It's hard, especially if you're big. So sometimes just doing that audit and, is going to be helpful. The other side of this is, again, if you're detecting this compromise, it's the same as a business email compromise. Once you've detected it, it's already happened. So the things that are going to change in the monitoring side really aren't necessarily, well, let's monitor Teams to see if somebody's email, if somebody starts doing, we're going to use Purview IRM or whatever, and they start acting funny, we can block them off. But then the bad guy's already in. So you have to look at, well, with this one event specifically, they made changes to the firewalls. They made changes to the logging. There were things that were happening in the environment that should have triggered somebody to be like, this isn't right, long before the actual breach happens.
Yeah, for sure. Phyllis, nobody, in your working with people in the controls, everybody's spot on with access control, aren't they?
That's right. That's right. Especially when it comes to their data.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, I think I've said this before. It reminds me of when I was at the agency, and all of a sudden we had records management course. And it's like, it seems silly, but it's true. Like, what's a record? When you work for the government, you're subject to FISA, not FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, and all these things. And it's like, oh, I'm required to go through my email and get data on X. And I'm like the worst. My email's just one big monolithic blob, right? And it's like all of a sudden I'm relying on Outlook search, which is in my out, to try to find this stuff. But I think, it speaks to like, what is a record? what is sensitive data? And it seems kind of dumb and basic, but it's true. It's like, oh, I've got, give me your phone number. Give me this. You know what I mean? You just do it over Slack. Like it's like a conversation, right? And, it's interesting when you bring that up, Will. It's like, okay, you have to understand what's important and what's not important. And it is kind of like that basic training that it seems obvious to so many of us, but it really isn't to so many as well.
for sure. All right, back to you, Jace.
Yeah. I kind of follow up. One last question for you real quick. If you had 30 seconds in front of a board that's never heard of this risk, what's the number one data point or statement or slide you'd get in front of them to just get their attention?
It's probably going to be what I said earlier. It's going to be that same thing. Like, this is the, if again, understanding what it is that we do, everybody does one of two things in business. They either want revenue or they serve constituents. Like, that's pretty much two. So how is this going to impact them? And then our ability to do that, make money or serve our constituents, and basically calculate it out that way. Going back to, this is the potential financial or reputational impact we're going to have. And here's the things we're doing to fix it. Right.
Yeah. I think it's great. Reputation is real quick for us. Reputation was big. It's hard to quantify it until you don't have it, and then you know how much it cost you. But I think that's very important too. So I kind of like that. Sorry, Phyllis, go ahead.
Yeah, no, over to Phyllis. Phyllis, I love what he said with serve constituents, because we a lot of times talk about, SLTTs, and people are like, oh, well, it's just a nonprofit. Well, and how do you, give us your sense on that? Because I think Will made a really good point.
Yeah, to me, I would call it like your mission or whatever, right? And so a lot of people are very, and it speaks to the reputation. Like, the luxury of a not-for-profit or nonprofit is, we are very closely tied to our mission. And while we do need to keep the lights on, it is very important, I think, to think about what is your mission, why are you there, what are the tools you're going to create, and why. And I think that also ties employees to your company and why they're there.
I strongly advise that for anything in security, just in general too. Like, the company needs to have a mission, and then that gets broken down to the C-suite and what are they doing to drive that mission, and then that goes down to the VPs, and everybody should go to work every day knowing, oh, I'm doing this, and it helps that, which helps my boss do this, and it helps their boss do this, and it helps the company. That way, you know what you're doing when you go to work, and you can prioritize. Right. And this is the same thing with cybersecurity spending. If it doesn't help drive that mission, I was about to say I'm famously for saying this, but I like to say this a lot. Like, the business is a race car. Its job is to win the race. And cybersecurity is like the harness and the brakes. We're one little part of it, and not the part everybody cares about. Right. Our job is to help the business win the race. If you can't tie back what you're doing to achieving that mission, then you're going to have a problem getting funding or, getting approval or buy-in or anything.
Well said. Really well said. Phyllis, to you to close us with these last few.
Yeah. So in the research, in Unit 42's research, there's a case of a compromised firewall exfilling data through a native Slack webhook, which PS, I had to look up what is a Slack webhook, right? Like, it's like, and it just goes to show you, in my opinion, like, people, these adversaries are looking at every single feature to say, what can I do? And it is a wild pivot. So, like, what does a SOC need to be watching to catch that before it works? Like, if maybe you didn't even know it was there.
Right. Yeah. I looked at this. There's a bunch of different things. One, your firewall talking to your teams should trigger some alarms. In that type of communication that was going on. So there's that. The other part is a lot of the failure points I talked about at a little earlier, which is they made changes to the firewall, right? So when that firewall, like, where was the change control? Where was the flag that went up that said, hey, the configuration's been changed? If you're in some type of compliant environment, all of that stuff should be monitored, because you need to know when you're falling out of compliance, right? I think then the other part is really that weird talking part, right? I like to use this famously in, like, OT security. A very similar thing is or IoT, medical IoT. If the incubator starts talking to the radiology machine, that like doesn't make any sense. Why would those two things talk? So it's similarly, again, it's a matter of looking for suspicious activities. So you're not trying to find, like, malicious Slack stuff. You're looking at that attack path. Like what are the weird things that are happening and why are they happening, and then piecing it together. So it's threat hunting essentially.
Right.
Yeah, really good.
Yeah. So in a related Unit 42 article, it walks through like that Friday afternoon scenario. You get a message from IT right when you're ready to go. Friday afternoon, let's hope we don't have any meetings. And then it says, and then that's really why that attack works. So from your perspective, how much does timing really account for the success of these attacks? And then what do you recommend to your clients to help mitigate this?
Yeah. Like I said before, criminals aren't stupid. They are definitely like the Target breach, the famous, it's the well we always keep going back to, but it was Christmas time, right? Or back to school. It's one of those like freeze.
It was
like,
Christmas.
Yeah. Having worked in retail, I know 2 weeks before, 2 weeks after, you don't touch anything. Nothing changes, right? So they're not going to make any changes. So we saw COVID happen. What happens? Phishing spiked. So they understand it's human nature. It's just crime. It's just criminals doing what criminals are going to do. They're just using technology to get it done. So the whole idea of, oh, it's Friday afternoon, they're going to want to go home. I'll be able to get, as the attacker, I can be like, oh yeah, it's Friday. I'm just trying to get this thing done so I can leave too, buddy. Can you just click this link for me real quick? They're going to find a way to sympathize or empathize with you. They're going to use, they're going to rush it. So absolutely, you need to be aware of that, right? If you're getting something weird and fishy happening, if you're distracted for whatever's going on, like then you shouldn't, that again, that's training, right? To be able to understand, hey, this is something that they want me to do. This is kind of serious. I don't know who this is, or maybe I'm not sure. I should just not do this, right?
Right. 3 minutes left, so I'll go to my last question. I think you kind of covered my next question anyway about, how is it that you can bind or bound talking to external organizations on Teams? So for the closing question, so you told us earlier, you pretty much have had almost every technical security role in an organization, and you've been able to transition yourself into a business executive who can, quote unquote, speak the language of the business, which we know, so many technical folks have a hard time with. So can you please provide us with maybe 2 or 3 recommendations for our MSP audience who still thinks, hey, being the smartest tech guy in the room wins. I'm going to wow you with my knowledge. What is it that MSPs really should be doing to help get the ear of C-suite?
Yeah, this is funny because I think most of the time you're selling to somebody like Jason, right? Or a CEO or an owner of a business. Showing them a demo of your SOC or how you can get alert is nobody cares. Like if I'm the CEO of the company, I want to know, I don't have to worry about this security stuff, right? You're going to take care of it and just, tell me if you need anything from me. So I think understanding that, the other part is something I do all the time is I learn the business. So if I'm talking to somebody in manufacturing again, I had a chat with a guy the other day. They tell me, I'm like, well, what do you make? Okay, so you do I talked to a guy who did like roller coaster parts. I was like, oh, cool. So then I start asking about different machines that they use and how does that work? And then, then how do you get it from there to there? Understand the business. And then you can think like an attacker and be like, well, okay, well, what happens if that stops working? Or what happens if that blows up or whatever, right? You can insert the things. They're going to be way more impressed that you know anything about their industry or their business way before you coming in and throwing in a bunch of acronyms about your threat landscape and all of that other good stuff. That's my thing. If you can actually identify with them, they're going to trust you more.
I think that's really interesting, and that's great advice. We do often on this call say you have to understand the business and understand the business risk. I think that's the first time I've heard, or maybe I just paid attention this time, is like before you even go into that initial meeting, do some research on that company. And
that's a sales 101 thing.
Okay, I'm not a salesperson.
Yeah, that was what I was gonna say. You get to know, like, you like, why do you even want to talk to me? What do I know about your business, right? And I think this was like, there was like an IDC study or somebody like long time ago, and it says like, what are the like factors that CIOs need to care about, and like, do they know my industry? That's in the top one, right? Because I like to say everybody's special, but nobody is, because it's all just about risk and people at the end of the day. But they do speak different languages in financial services versus, healthcare, for instance.
I think what you also just boiled down as we close it out, Will, which was a fantastic advice, is it allows us to have rapport. And like, if I went to Jason and started, just saying, hey, Jason, how do you look at, capital allocation versus let me talk to you about this threat. At least he's going to go, that's an interesting question from an MSP I've never gotten.
Exactly.
Right, Jason? Like, how, when looking at the different risks in the business, how do you make decisions of capital allocation and, et cetera, et cetera? I've now all of a sudden, he's like, man, this person actually is speaking something that's important to me and that I can relate to, right, Jace?
Absolutely. I mean, you may not get it 100% right, but I would, like you just said it, no one's ever talked to that way. Why are you talking this way? That's great. But you want to understand the probability and the impact, so I can understand it, right? So I think probability is key. I think Will said that earlier. It's just like, what's the potential of this? I mean, if it's something that's, there's something that's very high probability, but low dollar amount, low risk, okay, well, that may be just operational fix. But if it's a large amount with low probability, it doesn't mean you need to ignore it either, right? You still need to have a mitigant like that looking for ransomware, right? This low probability, considering other things, but that's a huge risk. Don't need to just stick your head in the sand. So it's really understanding that sweet spot of how you're allocating the dollar amount and the probability and then roadmap. And you can't do everything at once. So I think you need to understand your business and then get them to understand what you're trying to do is them coming in to help support you and consultative sell to you to get where you need to go and get there quickly and the biggest bang for the buck that you're getting. It's kind of a partnership. If they listen to you, because then they're like, hey, what do I think I need? You tell me if this is off base, or I may not know, and you give me a roadmap. I'm like, okay, that's just the value going back and forth. It's not like I'm coming to you. I don't want you coming in trying to sell me a widget, because I don't know if I need that widget. But if you listen to me and understand, and you come up with more of a consultative selling, that kind of helps, because if I feel like you're listening to me and trying to understand my business and have my back, if that makes sense.
Good stuff. Will, thanks a million for joining us. Can't wait to see you in a few months live in Vegas. Phyllis, thanks as always. Jonathan, Jason, thanks for coming in and being our special co-host today. Thanks all for listening. Great points out there, Eric's son, and everybody have a fantastic week ahead. Take care.
If you're in the Write a Boom community but not in our Discord yet, you're missing where the real conversation happens. Join community.writeaboom.com to access cybercall discussions, upcoming CTFs, boom camps, and early access to what's coming next. If you want to stay close to what's actually happening in the MSP security space, I'll see you there.